Right now, today marks 45 days until the upcoming bar exam, and it represents something that, in my experience, I could only call reality weekend. Yeah, reality weekend. What do I mean by that? Well, it's not a reality TV show, although it might be. It feels like one sometimes. Sometimes this feels like the worst moments of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. But this is when the reality of the bar exam sets in, and it can manifest itself in a number of different ways. For a lot of people who are in big mega bar reviews, and certainly that doesn't apply to our students, but the people in the big classrooms, this is the weekend when it dawns on them that what they're doing is simply getting information, but no skill opportunity, no feedback, no training. They're just getting dumped on with information. And without that, and with the hope that there would be some teaching, some instruction, some assistance, some feedback, some sense of community, the reality hits for those people that that's not what those courses are there to provide. And obviously, that's what we think we're doing for our students. But it is the weekend, truthfully, when our phones start ringing like crazy with people saying, is it too late to get in the course? In fact, as we've been talking today, we've had people enrolling in the course. And the answer is no, it's not too late. So if you've got friends or people who are thinking about that, we can certainly help them. But the reality is that for a lot of bar takers, this weekend is a time of nearly absolute terror because people realize that they've invested a lot of time and a lot of money in those big mega courses to just sit and listen to someone talk, typically on a video, and they're all alone and they're out there on their own. The problem is a lot of bar takers have no idea what's going on at this point or how to get better, how to improve their performance. So if you're sitting in that kind of a classroom setting, you can imagine people look to their left and they look to their right and they realize the people sitting next to them know less than they do. And that's not a very comforting feeling for most of us. So reality begins to set in and we start to see some evidence of panic. Now, we get that same sense of panic for a different reason in our course. Some of our students will start to feel like that what they need to do at this stage of their study is to just write more answers. I'll do hundreds of essay questions, or I'll do thousands of multi-state questions, or I'll buy extra courses, or instead of doing 50 multi-state questions a night, if you're in another course, I'll do 75 a night and I'll get better that way. But the reality hits at about the 45-day mark for most people that that's not going to be successful. And so it's important over this weekend to take a deep breath and assess where you are and assess what you need to do. There's still time to make real choices about how you're going to study, whether you're in our course or somewhere else, and how you're going to prepare. Now, for those of you who will be listening to this, who are in a large big box bar review, you need to recognize that what your course is doing right now is simply providing you with information. They're not teaching. That's never really been their goal. Their goal was simply to put information in your hands, and it's now up to you to use that information. If you're not in a position where you can add to a course like ours or get assistance, then you need to make best advantage you can of the information that you've been given. And that might be why you were watching this at some later date. It's not a bad thing. It's just do the best you can, take the information you've got and make something useful out of it. But more appropriately, for those of you who are listening to me live today and in our course, with 45 days to go or thereabouts, it's still reality weekend. And the answer is yes, absolutely. For a lot of people, 45 days starts to represent that middle ground in which the exam now feels like it's imminent. It's going to happen, but it's not so close that there aren't adjustments or things that can be done. And I think the kinds of questions that you've asked today are ones that represent that. What can I do? How do I adjust what I'm doing with my studies? What should I be focusing on? This is typically a time when I begin to see a lot more work being submitted for review from our personal and premium mentored students. It's a time when I see the pace of work begin to pick up. Previously, it might have been a week or so between conferences that I'd have with a student because that's how their work and their writing pace was going. Now it might be 1 or 2 days between pieces of work, and that's great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with picking up the pace and moving more quickly. But be sure that your work is purposeful. Whether you're sending work to me or you're just writing for yourself, make sure that everything you're doing is purposeful, that it's getting better, that you have a particular reason for doing the assignment, and that you are evaluating your work. And that's a real key at this stage. One thing I want to emphasize is that 45 days in bar exam years or days is still a very long time. You can make a lot of adjustments in your study, in your preparation, and you can and you will improve a great deal. Certainly if you're in our course, we see massive improvement in this period of time. You will see the biggest improvement over the next 30 days. In other words, from day 45 until day 15 is when the biggest changes happen for most people. You're going to learn a lot of information in the next 45 days, as long as you're open to that possibility. Some people shut down. They think they know everything. They've learned everything. I know you're smarter than that. The key here is to avoid what I would describe as high panic mode. Some people get to this reality weekend and they're not listening any longer. They're not paying attention. They're not following directions. They're not reading their emails. They're not looking at what's going on. They're not listening to us when we talk in the Facebook group or we send an email or in these videos. And the truth is, if you've already gone into that high panic mode, the next 45 days are going to be exceedingly difficult for you. And frankly, each day will get excruciatingly worse. And a lot of people just hit the wall. They just totally melt down at the end. Now, there is a period, a meltdown period that's actually coming. It's going to come in another week or so. We call it the dreaded 7th week. And I'll have more to say about that later. You don't have to do it, but I'll tell you that a lot of people get sick, they get stressed out, they get into arguments with people, they really lose it. And the start of that period is this weekend coming up. Now, Reality Weekend is also a time when historically, after 50-some exams that I've taught people through, I start to get what I would describe as the eviscerating email or message or personal message or text message or phone message in which students decide that things are not going well with their studies. And it must be my fault as a teacher, or the fault of our course, or the fault of the bar examiners, or the fault of their family members, or their spouse, or their employer, or just about anyone in their universe except themselves. This is kind of a point when I think for some people, it becomes obvious that something isn't working quite right. But the hardest thing to do right now is to acknowledge that you, as the bar taker, the student, might be the core of that problem. And in order to make that acknowledgement, you have to do some soul searching. And so what some people end up doing is that they don't feel comfortable with that. So they look externally and they say, there are all these other things that are causing me to not be successful. Well, in most cases, the reality is that the core problem still is with the bar taker themselves. It might be an inability to follow directions, or an inability to get down to the work and get it done, to schedule themselves. It could be fear of failure. It could be any number of things going on. And I encourage you, if you're in the personal or the premium course, to talk to me about that stuff. If you're in the basic course, go on the Facebook group, post and ask questions, all of you, for those kinds of things. Let the community support you in that regard. I think what you'll discover is that there are a lot of things that can be helpful to you. Now, I would also say that some people get involved in what I would describe as task avoidance, massive task avoidance at this stage. People start thinking about and talking about focusing on just about anything except what really matters in their studies. That's particularly easy to do when there's the chaos in Washington and there's the Bachelorette and there's basketball and there's baseball or there's football during that season or whatever it might be. There's always things that can distract us and take our attention away. And certainly all the things going on in your families, going on at work, and so on. It's human nature. It's part of the process. And as we get closer and closer to the exam, task avoidance becomes a bigger and harder thing to get around. It just becomes a looming challenge for many people. But this is probably the last point at which I can see people still trying to do task avoidance and justify it to themselves. Pretty hard to be a task avoidant person at 30 days out. You know you got to do the studies. Today, you might say to yourself, well, I think I could, put that off for another couple of days. Well, Reality Weekend sets in and most people kind of go, yeah, I probably can't do that. So what do you do? If this is the way that you're starting to feel or to lean into this Reality Weekend, if you're starting to get irritated at everyone and everything else, if you've been listening to this discussion up till now saying, when is he going to get to the point? My point is made. First of all, take comfort in knowing that it's pretty normal. Secondly, take a deep breath. And I mean it literally, figuratively, take a deep belly breath. Stop and step back it's probably not everyone else in your world that's causing the problem. You may have some complicity in what's going on here. And to the extent that you have any responsibility or complicity, take ownership of that. Resolve to correct the things that you can correct. Let the people around you know the things that they can do to help you. But I would say in most cases, when I see someone who's in the high tension, high anxiety point, and I get some contact from them, the best advice I can give is just take your hands off the keyboard, sit back, take a deep breath, close your mind, close your eyes for a moment, and relax. Now, if you're doing the paraliminals, we got some great paraliminals, the overcoming overwhelm, the deep, deep relaxation. Those are great ones for this purpose. If you're having trouble sleeping at night, sleep deeply, wake refreshed. They're really good paraliminals, and they're great to help. The point is, if you let us know that there's a problem, we certainly will do whatever we can to fix whatever that is. Typically, the things that students tell us are big problems are not big problems at all. And so we can help resolve those and you can move forward. So in the moving forward, the idea is to create momentum, and that's what's really important. And so this is a momentum juncture for most people. You know, as I'm recording, as we're talking today, we are in baseball season, and it would apply anytime. But when I think about baseball, I think about the great play, in my mind, the most beautiful play in baseball in many respects, is the pivot that the second baseman makes on a double play. There's a ground ball, it comes from somebody else in the infield, the third baseman or the first baseman or the shortstop. They throw the ball to second base. The second baseman catches the ball and they pivot to throw to first base. It's a beautiful play when it's done right. Well, in a sense, to me, that's what the 45-day mark represents. It's a pivot point. It's when you pivot from a fairly leisurely study rate. And I would say, even if you feel like you've really been pushing, up to this point, you've been relatively leisurely studying, or even if you're just beginning, if you were in a big box bar review. But you go from that point to suddenly realizing the exam's coming up. It's 45 days away. You better get on with your work. So you have to pivot now and throw the ball hard to get the runner out, to get to your goal. And that's an okay thing. There's nothing wrong with a hard pivot. Plant your foot, throw the ball. Do what you have to do right now. So if you're in a course and it is not working, pivot. Do what you have to do to get it to work. Find the help that you need. If you're in another course besides ours and you think that you could do better with ours, pivot. Find out what you need and make the change. If you're in our course and you're having trouble, get on our Facebook group. Let us know. Let us figure out the way that we can help you pivot as well. The reality of this reality weekend is that we can only respond as students come to us. We're not mind readers. I can tell you that some of these things are going to happen, and that may make me seem clairvoyant from time to time, but it's impossible to predict where each individual is going to be. So communication becomes really important at this stage. Over the next 45 days, I can assure you that you're going to learn a great deal. You're going to grow a great deal. You're going to develop new skills. You're going to become much more confident as you move towards the exam. And that should be your goal in everything you're doing, constant, regular improvement. And if you don't see the improvement, what I would suggest is to look at where you are now and then go back. Look at where you were when you began in your studying, in your writing, in your skill set, and see the difference. I think you'll see that there's a change. Certainly if you're in our course, I see this all the time with students. Their writing is so much better now than when they began. And oftentimes I say, just go back and look at your early assignments and see the difference that that makes. This is your chance over the next few days to pivot, to take stock of where you are realistically, and then to make the changes that you need to make. And I hope when you do that, that it's going to give you some measure of peace, some sense of accomplishment, and a real feeling of hope for what's going to be coming up over the next 45 days. And so for all of you, I wish nothing other than a great reality weekend.